Welcome to another episode of Breaking into Cybersecurity, where we talk to individuals who have broken into the community and want to share their journeys with others. Today, we have Steve who's joining us on the podcast. Steve, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you got into cyber.
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California, spent a few years in Texas, and then a few years in San Francisco. Now I live in the Pacific Northwest. I got into cybersecurity as a profession sometime around 2011 when I joined Lookout Mobile Security, and I was with them for a number of years. I later went on to go work with Synac, and then most recently I was at Delphos Labs, where I was kind of one of their founding engineers helping to bring that product up off the ground. We built a really cool system that allows you to put in a binary and perform the difficult and tedious work of reverse engineering it to discover what is it that this binary does. And the core feature I think we delivered there that was awesome was the summary of a binary. And what motivated me to get into cybersecurity, I have a kind of a weird story. I was living with some friends in Austin and they were talking about, I'm good at this and he's good at that, and you're really good at computers and you should get into hacking. And it was kind of like an epiphany where, I was really good at computers. I was writing some software and doing some stuff. And I was like, you know what? This is interesting. This is something that I don't know about. It makes me curious. And it spun off from there.
And at what stage of your life was this?
I think I was a young 20 something. I think I was maybe 19 or 20. And I was living in this really broken down apartment in Southwest Austin, and I was actually promoting electronic music downtown. I was dating a go-go dancer. I was living my best 20-year-old life, somehow getting into all the bars with while still being underage because I had connections and friends. I knew a lot of the owners and stuff, and I was actually answering for work. I was answering phones for Samsung. I was taking calls about DVD players. So that's humble beginnings.
So, hacking the codecs from the beginning?
Maybe. I mean, I the job answering calls for Samsung, they fired me because I quote unquote distributed unauthorized software. And the unauthorized software was a network scoped web application that allowed our email agents to like draft and use predefined email responses. Some 80 to 90% of the emails that we got were all the same. So I made this tool and I made it available to my coworkers, and then IT found it and they were displeased.
Okay. So that was your first job. W- Tell us about your evolution into your career and how it evolved from there and some of the steps that you took to get further into security and maybe any meaningful choices that you made along the way or happy accidents.
I think the most formative moment for me was the one I talked about where my friends were like, "You should be a hacker," and I was like, "Dude, that sounds cool." That at least opened the door to me as an idea, something that I potentially could get into. I was always curious about, and it never really occurred to me that like, hey, I could do this. And so that was really formative. Just having someone around who identifies, who recognizes, what you bring to the table and is willing to say it out loud, I think can be the first moment that a lot of people realize that there's real opportunity in front of them. But I think that there were another two moments that were really critical, which was, I started experimenting with things. I started building my own sort of labs and breaking into systems to understand how they work. And I started looking for like-minded people. I found Austin Hackers Anonymous, which at the time was still run by HD Moore. And there were a bunch of really, really talented people who went to Austin Hackers Anonymous. I remember I met R Snake there. I met a couple other folks. I don't want to name drop too much, but they're part of the story. And I also found a group called ATX Hackerspace, which is founded by a few guys, Martin Bogelmoni and Matt McCabe and a couple others. And I was their first sort of like bright-eyed, curious young, member who showed up and brought a lot of energy and enthusiasm and excitement, but really had no ground to stand on. I was just looking for connection and I found it. I helped them build out their hackerspace, the first version of it, and then the second version of it. And somewhere along the way, someone says to me, you know, you're really talented and you're doing all this silly stuff. Why don't you come work with us at our company? And that was really the moment that I went from being someone who was enthusiastic and excited about cybersecurity to being somebody who did it every day for the rest of my career and every day since.
And what was that first role?
It was a contract role at a healthcare company that was doing clinical studies. And my role there was not necessarily in cybersecurity, but I
Mhm.
was given the opportunity to go build a new system for them to track. And along the way, you know, I was surrounded by these people who had a lot of deep experience in cybersecurity. And so the sort of community training began there. I would say that my career in cybersecurity didn't really start until I ended up at Lookout Mobile Security.
So from the hospital in that role, what steps did you take until you got to Lookout? What was the evolution like? Because oftentimes that evolution is where I've found a lot of people struggle, and that's where you're looking for the guidance.
So I've always been a self-taught engineer. I've always been somebody who like actively goes out and seeks new knowledge, right? New domains, new challenges. And I think that my path is probably very similar to other people, but also very different from others, you know? I think that's always the case. So my path was I knew that I needed to find a real programming job, not just a contract gig at a local thing. I wanted to go be a real software engineer. And I knew that in order to do that, I would need to end up in the Bay Area. At least at the time, this was 2010, 2008, 2009, maybe something like that. I'm getting my dates a little mixed up. But, software engineering in Silicon Valley at the time was this like kind of opulent experience where the entire industry was flooded with money all the time and they were constantly looking for new talent and they were offering ridiculous perks and incentives and everyone had a nap room, right? And so I knew that if I ever wanted to find my way to where I eventually wanted to be, I needed to continue to cut my teeth on engineering skills, become the best engineer that I could be, and expose myself to a lot of attack surface, create attack surface, and then resolve it. And then I knew that if I continued on this path and I focused on these areas of my work, it would give me the important prerequisite information I would need to go and apply for somewhere like Lookout, where my skill set would be recognized. My role in that company was as a front end engineer on their security team. And there are a lot of engineering roles at Lookout, but to be put as an engineer on the security team specifically kind of required the right perspective and the right attitude. And so, developing that perspective and developing that attitude became a significant portion of my roadmap as a software engineer moving towards cybersecurity.
What gave you that mindset? Because oftentimes we find maybe in doing threat analysis or looking at a blast radius, we think, what could happen here?
Mhm.
And what gives you that mindset constantly to be able to apply that in your day to day job?
I think honestly, for me, it comes down to a single moment. I was working late at night in a data center, monitoring alarms for a private alarm monitoring company. And it really felt like being in the Matrix, right? Like I got to go hang out in the Matrix every night. And it was kind of a neat playground to go explore to see what existed in a real network. And my boss asked me to build an application for the company, and I was still a relatively fledgling programmer at the time. I hadn't really built a lot of production systems. And that system required a password authentication form. And of course, I was hanging out on IRC and I was already talking to other hackers and learning things. And so I sent one of them a link to the thing that I was building. And I was like, hey, check this out. I built this. It's really cool, right? And the first thing he did is he shoved a comma into the password form and broke. And I was like, I had this moment. I think that like you asked what drives this, this attitude, this perspective on cybersecurity. That moment for me was really formative because I didn't understand what I was looking at. I had built this thing by hand myself, wrote every single line of code and checked every semicolon. And this dude put one character in it and broke the whole system. And that to me felt like magic. And I've always been attracted to magic. I've always been attracted to open secrets. To me, that felt like someone had just opened, someone had just poked a hole just big enough for me to look through and ask the question, what's on the other side? And so I learned about SQL injection and I was like, whoa, what? What? Like, it was like, what? Like, my mind exploded, you know? I was like, okay, well, you can inject SQL. Can you inject JavaScript? You can inject JavaScript. Can you inject PHP? You can inject PHP. Can you? And, I started going down this rabbit hole of like, look at all the ways that I can put code into a system to make it do what I want it to do, as opposed to what the original author had intended it to do. And I never looked at the world the same again after that.
Uh, I never thought of it that way. I mean, I've always thought about code injection as, yes, you're trying to potentially get a different output, but never at that scale either. So, wow. So you're at this data company, and what's your next move? How do you continue to grow your career? So it sounds like you're half in development, half in security. Do you keep that focus in development and security as you grow your career?
I feel like I don't know if this is common or if this is uncommon. So I don't know if I'm special or if I'm just another lemming. But the way that I viewed my career is as a proficient engineer with deep security roots and context. And so this makes me particularly well suited to go work for companies that are building security focused products. Great example, Delphos Labs, right? So I came in as their founding engineer. They had an idea, and the CTO, Caleb is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. He likes to read research papers and do, deep AI ML experiments. That's not exactly the depth of my interest, but I like to build things. I like to build products, and I like to, because I have this background, this understanding, this personal context with cybersecurity, it puts me in a really unique position to take this other interest that I have of being an engineer who builds beautiful, elegant systems. That's really what that's where my heart is at. And then I get to go build beautiful, elegant systems that do outrageously crazy, offensive things, right? When I say offensive, I don't mean like to your mother, I mean to other systems. It's been really interesting. I've built a lot of really cool stuff along the way. I've built a threat detection map that tracks the spread of malware across the globe and helps perform attribution. I've built an entire red team platform. If you've ever used the Synac red team platform, I built like most of that. I built Delphos
Wow.
Labs, most of Delphos Labs. If you go to the website right now, you can upload a binary for free and get a natural language summary of what that binary does. A lot of the pipelines and user interfaces and stuff, I built a lot of those. The company took on some really great talent after the fact, and now it's sort of its own living, breathing ecosystem now. But it was really rewarding, and it felt very good to have those opportunities because I do bring this high level engineering perspective alongside this security knowledge.
I emphasize that all the time to folks that are coming from different backgrounds, that it's not just security. It can be your background and security. That way you can blend what you already know with security. So if it's healthcare and security. If it's physical and security. Like if it's logistics and security. There's so many blends that you can do, and you can create your own unique niche so many times that you can end up creating your own tools, your own solutions, because you see potentially unique ways to solve problems that not many people see when you come from an intersection of so many different competencies.
Yes, and the reality is that no matter what your interest is or no matter what your competency is, there will always be attack surface, right? If you're interested in physical security, there's obviously a physical security attack surface, right? If you develop an adversarial mindset, I think this is part of what we're talking about when we talk about that moment where my website got injected. At that moment was when I developed an adversarial mindset. And when you develop an adversarial mindset, you see attack surface everywhere.
So, how do you keep up now with learning and growing with the evolving technology space? I'm sure there's some repeating trends and patterns over the years, but how do you keep up yourself and continue to grow?
And then I think that the reason that this gets talked about a lot is because it's so hard to do. This is a really difficult thing to do. But there are ways to do it that are fulfilling and don't feel like constantly re-educating yourself. The way that I like to do it is I like to do projects. I am always working on a project. It doesn't matter if I'm working a full-time job or if I'm, whatever it is I'm doing, I'm always working on a side project. And every time I work on a side project, I always look for something new to try. I generally reach into my bag of tricks and pull out, some of the basic stuff that I always use to build stuff because that's my flavor, But I always replace at least one of those things with something new that I can go explore. And this is true both as an engineer and in cybersecurity. There are places you can go and read. You can sign up for the full disclosure mailing list. There's a lot of hackers on there. There's tons of stuff, and the depth that you can go is almost boundless. So you get to kind of choose how deep into the pool you want to go and subscribe to those places. You can go on YouTube. You can find podcasts like this one where you can learn that way. And approaching it again with this like adversarial mindset and this curiosity. Every time I hear something that I've never heard before, I don't let it rest. It sort of burns a hole in the back of my mind. What is that? How does it work? This was the case with ROP techniques. For listeners who might not be familiar, there's a way of manipulating memory inside applications to get those pieces of memory to basically construct a function that you can run to take over a system as part of an attack. It's very technically advanced. It's only necessary in certain types of systems where there's like, heap spray protection and stuff like that, but I have a functional enough understanding to grasp the concept and be able to create a mental model. And that, you know, just that act of hearing something interesting, being curious about it, and allowing yourself to follow it through to some level of competency. It doesn't have to be perfect competency. I understand. I have a mental model of it, and that allows me to at least operate in this space and work with other people with shared language and shared understanding.
Let's talk about skills and competencies when it comes for looking for a job and applying for different roles. For example, when you were pivoting between roles, what were some of the challenges you ran into and some of the mitigations or techniques you used to overcome them?
Interviewing is always hard. Job searching is always difficult, right? There's a lot of legal and economic pressure on both ends of the equation. And so, the companies will probe you to discover your competencies and your weaknesses. And so I think that a big part of it is just taking stock of what you really know, what you can really do, and being upfront about what those skills are and being upfront about where your skills still need to be developed. That, I think, sets the stage quite well for the rest of the conversation when it comes to looking for work in the cybersecurity space.
Go ahead.
I've got a blog post on there about my interview process, what it takes to pass my interview. And I think that my perspective on this probably aligns very closely with perspectives that you'll see from other people in the cybersecurity industry as a whole, in the engineering industry, which is it doesn't necessarily matter if you can write me an academic dissertation on how to perform the perfect buffer overflow. What I'm interested in is, are you passionate? Do you have the requisite context? Are you trainable? Are you somebody who can integrate into the company culture and the team? I think these are things that companies look for. And yes, skills are an important part of it, right? I want to make sure that you're coming in with enough skills that you can be useful in the role, that you can be effective in your role when you come in. And I think that's what companies are always looking for. But it's more than that, I think, for especially in this industry, where if you really want to operate at a level that is at the point where you can do interesting things and see interesting things, you have to bring that enthusiasm, the passion, the energy. Show people that you love doing this kind of work, and doors will open.
Right. It's something that I've said before too, like volunteering at like a B-sides conference or other conferences, local conferences to kind of show that you're collaborating and integrating with the community and putting in calls for papers and sharing your ideas, whether it be on different forums and having a blog to share your ideas shows that you have interest in the community, you have a point of view, a perspective, and you're not just regurgitating something.
Or writing automated LinkedIn posts with AI emojis all over the place.
Yeah, sometimes we all need a little AI help. Yeah, I admit to using AI automation. There's so much value to using automation. That brings up an interesting topic. From your perspective, in your development of both software and security, what are some of the threats and challenges we face as we move into this agentic era?
Whew, that's a big question.
Sorry, just dropped it on you.
Yeah, that's a really big question. For a long time, the barrier to entry for building applications and interacting with computers in ways that allowed you to be creative was code. I say code in air quotes because,
Mhm,
you know, there's more to it than that, but it was code. And the barrier to entry being code requires a lot of nuanced knowledge about how to build systems that kind of you sort of glean over time, design patterns and more abstract sort of concepts. And that meant that both white hats and black hats, though I hate to use binary terms like that,
mhm.
had to cross this barrier to be able to operate in the space. And I think that what AI fundamentally is doing right now is allowing us to offload our cognitive load, providing us with context and knowledge that would be difficult to access because of its distributed nature. Whereas
Mhm.
now it's all in one point. And the agentic nature of this thing means that we don't even necessarily have to translate that knowledge and that context into programs or sequences of operations on a computer. I almost want to repeat something I heard verbatim by a hacker I know named Salk or Silk, brilliant at reverse engineer. He says, and this is back in when Docker was hot and fresh. He goes, "You can build an entire data center in a Docker Compose file. If you can't learn cybersecurity in that context, you're never going to learn it." I think the AI and the agentic stuff is going to democratize access to knowledge and capabilities. It's going to open this space to people who felt that it was beyond their reach. And I see it as a fundamentally good thing. I don't think that secrets can stay secrets forever, nor should they.
I'm with you there. I also on the threat side of things, the that it amplifies the ability for someone to now take that Docker file and multiply it times 1,000 anytime they want and just shoot it out without any regard for the impact or understanding the impact because, oh, they found the code in a skills library
Mhm,
and they decided to run it in their organization. And they're like, "Oh, yeah, the skills library said I just need to do this, and it'll gather all the data that I need." And
mhm.
now all the data from their organization's exposed.
I think a lot of the concerns that a lot of people have about AI comes down to human behavior. and has nothing to do
Mhm.
with the technology itself.
Yes.
A hammer is a tool, and a
Mhm.
hammer can build you a home, or it can be a murder weapon. And
True.
I think the same is true of any new technology. Any time in history that a new transformative technology has been introduced, there has been a chorus of fear and anxiety from, I would say, mostly people who don't understand it, but
Mhm.
also from people who do understand it and are attempting to communicate risk in a way that extends beyond their academic circles, you know? Um,
Mm.
I think these problems that you're talking about are not AI problems. They are social problems. And
They are.
it's my opinion that the way that we should resolve these issues is not by creating artificial limitations on great tools, which is a reasonable initial approach. I think the durable resolution to those kinds of problems are social policies and standards and norms.
Yes. Yes. Setting up governance and social constructs within the organization to document acceptable use of data, of technology, and those set the foundations, and then you can implement any technologies as potential guardrails and stopgaps. But yeah, I would agree with you that it's a social problem first, but
Mhm.
you got you have to try to use technology as a, a check to that balance.
I know I feel comfortable describing the problem. You
Mhm.
know, the right solution is a question of policy, and policy is not really my cup of tea. I fundamentally believe that people should be free to explore technologies and experiment with them and use them in ways that don't create harm. I don't necessarily believe that the right way to achieve that is by enforcement, through coercion or violence or anything like that, or by limiting the systems. But it's a difficult. These are deep questions of policy.
Well, can I take it deeper then?
Go for it.
Uh, So open Claude running on a Mac workstation within your organization, yes or no?
There's often a difference between what can be done and what should be done and what's wise to do.
Hence the nuance, right?
Yeah.
There's the potential of what technology can do and what AI can do, and then there's the implementation of it, right? The agentic error is removing a lot of the guardrails that enterprise technology has enforced for its own resilience over the years. But if people now introduce a vulnerability that can self spread, it potentially harmful to it.
Yes,
I will
it
say.
could have been done by any other means, you know?
Yes.
I think that putting the burden of responsibility on the power of the tool undermines the reality of the intent of the operator.
Wow. I never never went this deep on breaking into cybersecurity, Steve. Love it, love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on and ending in such a deep session. Any final tips you wanna give to those that are interested in the industry?
Yeah, stick together. Find your people, build community, create professional connections, make friends, hack things together, go do a crack me or a lot. The connections that you make along the way and the people who you make friends with, they will remember you long after the end of your project. And those are the most important developments that you can make in your career. So just go forward and do the work that you love with joy with others and watch the spring bloom in front of you.
Mm, love it. Well, send me all those links that you mentioned. I'll include those in the show notes for those that are interested. And thank you so much for coming on, Steve. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Cheers.